On a granite island in the St. Lawrence River, a castle stands sentinel. It bears the name of a global empire built on thread and steel, Singer. The story told on tourist boats is a comfortable one, a whimsical summer home, a Gilded Age fantasy inspired by a romantic novel. But this official history is a carefully stitched fable designed to cover a much darker pattern. Why would the president of the world's most famous sewing machine company build a medieval fortress complete with a dungeon and a labyrinth of secret passages? Why is its architecture not one of triumphant celebration, but of grim defense? These hidden corridors and spy holes weren't for parlor games. They were for surveillance, for escape. The granite walls, quarried from a neighboring island, don't speak of leisure. They scream of paranoia. The official narrative mentions parties and yachting, but the blueprints reveal a self-sufficient, fireproof and defensible stronghold built to withstand a siege. But a siege from whom? This wasn't a defense against a foreign navy. It was a fortress built against an enemy much closer to home, an enemy forged in the very factories that paid for every stone. So we must ask the question that history has conveniently ignored. What was Frederick Bourne, the master of a domestic empire, so terrified of? What was the Gilded Age horror so profound that it drove him to build a sanctuary not to enjoy his fortune, but to hide from the world that created it? The story, we are told, is a Gilded Age dream, polished for postcards and tourist brochures. We hear of Singer Castle, the romantic folly of a benevolent industrialist, Frederick Gilbert Bourne, the fifth president of the Singer Sewing Machine Company. They say he wanted to bring a piece of Europe to the American wilderness, commissioning a fairy tale structure modeled after Woodstock Castle from a Sir Walter Scott novel. It is presented as a whimsical summer palace, a place of light-hearted intrigue with its famous secret passages, a playground for a wealthy family far from the city's grime. This narrative is comforting. It is simple, and it is almost entirely a fabrication. This story, however convenient, crumbles under the weight of a single fact: the building's name. It was not christened Singer Castle. It was commissioned and built under a much colder, more imposing title: The Towers. This was not a name drawn from romance, but from a posture of power and defense. The shift in name is the first clue that we are dealing with a sanitized history. The popular narrative asks us to believe that a man who commanded a global manufacturing empire, a master of logistics and ruthless corporate strategy, would spend a fortune, over $500,000 in 1905, the equivalent of tens of millions today, simply to indulge a literary fantasy. The idea is absurd. The motivation for this granite fortress was not found in the pages of a novel, but in the blood-soaked headlines of his era. To understand the Towers, you must first forget the sewing machine and remember the violent world that built it. The late 19th century was not just an age of unparalleled wealth. It was an age of open, brutal class warfare. Frederick Bourne, a man who rose from a humble clerk to the presidency, had a front-row seat to the chaos. He witnessed the Haymarket Affair of 1886, where a labor demonstration ended with a bombing and the execution of anarchists. He watched the Homestead Strike of 1892, where steelworkers fought a pitched battle against Pinkerton agents hired by Andrew Carnegie and Henry Clay Frick, leaving 16 people dead. This was his world, a landscape of strikes, assassinations, and a deep, simmering rage directed squarely at men like him. This is the overlooked story, the forgotten parallel. The Towers was not a retreat from the city. It was a strategic withdrawal from society. It was conceived as an impregnable, fireproof and defensible sanctuary for his dynasty. Every architectural choice was dictated by a deep-seated paranoia, a rational fear of the very workforce that generated his immense fortune. The intricate network of secret passages was not for the amusement of his children. It was a system for surveillance and escape, allowing him to monitor his staff and guests or to vanish if the island were ever breached. The granite construction wasn't chosen for its rustic charm, but for its resistance to fire, a defense against arson, a common tool in the era's violent labor disputes. The remote island location provided a natural moat, ensuring that any approaching threat would be seen and could only arrive by water, a choke point he could completely control. This was not a home. It was a private stronghold, built to protect his family from a social uprising he saw as not just possible, but inevitable. The story of sewing machines is merely the cover for the real story, one of a Gilded Age captain of industry building a fortress against his own workers. A fortress built against one's own workers demands a very specific kind of ground. The choice of where to make a stand was not a matter of scenery, but of survival. For a man like Frederick Bourne, geography was strategy, and the selection of a remote granite outcrop in the St. Lawrence River was the first and most critical move in a lifelong chess game against the forces he had helped to unleash. Why this particular rock in a river of 1,000 islands? The place was originally called Lone Star Island, a name with a hint of rugged American individualism. Bourne would acquire it and its surrounding islets, and it would become known by a more fitting, more Gothic name, Dark Island. This was not a choice of convenience, it was a declaration. An isolated 7-acre perimeter, defensible on all sides, was a military planner's dream. It offered perfect isolation from the masses, yet remained completely accessible to him and his chosen few via a private fleet of yachts. The river itself provided the perfect uncrossable moat. The deep, cold waters of the St. Lawrence Seaway are a formidable barrier, making a surprise approach by a small, determined group nearly impossible. Any vessel would be exposed for miles in either direction. This was not a pleasant riverfront view, it was a field of fire. Positioned in the middle of a major shipping channel, the towers functioned as a private watchtower, allowing its master to observe the arteries of North American commerce from the safety of his stone walls. No one could approach unseen. Every movement on the water was known. But the most crucial element of this strategy was distance. The island was a world away from the simmering cauldrons of industry, New York, Pittsburgh, Chicago. It was an escape not just from the oppressive summer heat, but from the consequences of the Gilded Age itself, the cold-choked air, the rampant disease of the slums, and, most importantly, the physical threat of a desperate and angry workforce. He was placing a buffer of hundreds of miles of water and wilderness between his family and the industrial battlegrounds. This location was the ultimate expression of Gilded Age power, the ability to command nature itself as a shield. He didn't just build a house, he annexed a piece of the continent and turned it into a private fiefdom. The island provided the perfect, isolated stage, but it was the design of the fortress itself that would reveal the true depth of its owner's fears, a desperate play for absolute security. But what does absolute security truly look like? For a Gilded Age tycoon, it was not a simple matter of high fences and locked doors. It was a cold calculus of control, an obsessive ambition to engineer a world free from chance, chaos, and consequence. To understand the granite fortress on Dark Island, you must understand the two great terrors that haunted the mind of its master, fire and revolution. These were not abstract fears. They were the existential threats of his time, and the towers was his architectural answer to both. The war against the first enemy, fire, was total. While his peers were building flammable wooden palaces in Newport, Bourne commissioned a structure of stone and steel. The granite was not just for show, it was an armor plating against the great destroyer of 19th century fortunes. It was quarried from nearby Oak Island, a logistical choice that ensured Bourne controlled the very source of his fortress's strength. Inside, the design was even more radical. There is virtually no structural wood. Floors are made of reinforced concrete and terracotta blocks, supported by massive steel I-beams. This was not a home that happened to be fire-resistant. It was a fireproof vault designed to be lived in. But surviving a fire is meaningless if you can be starved out or cut off from the world. This brings us to the second principle of the fortress: absolute self-sufficiency. Bourne was building a machine for living that could operate independently of the civilization he distrusted. A massive powerhouse was constructed, containing a steam-driven generator that supplied electricity to the entire island. This was a strategic masterstroke. The towers had reliable power years before many mainland towns, meaning it could be lit, heated, and defended without reliance on a vulnerable external grid. A sophisticated pumping system drew water from the river, and a vast icehouse preserved provisions. The island could be sealed off, a self-sustaining kingdom in miniature. This obsession with control, however, extended beyond external threats. It turned inward, revealing the deepest layer of Bourne's paranoia. He instructed his architect, Ernest Flagg, to weave a web of secrecy into the very bones of the building. The castle is riddled with a network of hidden passageways, concealed doors, and secret panels. These were not charming novelties for games of hide and seek. They were an arsenal of surveillance and escape. From within the walls, Bourne could move unseen, listening to conversations, observing his guests, and monitoring his staff. The most chilling evidence is found in the library. Here, a portrait of a court jester swings inward, revealing a hidden peephole and a narrow passage. From this concealed vantage point, one can look down, completely unnoticed, upon the great hall below. Imagine the mindset of a man who builds a secret spying post into the heart of his own home. And then there is the dungeon. While tour guides may treat it as a quirky feature, its presence speaks to a grimly practical imagination. It begs the question, in this fortress built to repel the outside world, who was the dungeon for? The answer reveals the ultimate truth of the castle. It wasn't just a shield against the anger of the masses, it was a mechanism to control everyone within its walls. A mechanism to control everyone within its walls must first send an unmistakable message to everyone without. Before a single secret passage was used, before a single hidden peephole was activated, the fortress had to declare its purpose to the world. And the exterior of the towers was a masterclass in architectural intimidation. This was not a building that invited you in. It was a structure that dared you to approach. The commission was given to Ernest Flagg, an architect celebrated for his elegant Beaux-Arts skyscrapers that defined the New York City skyline. The choice itself is a paradox. Why hire a master of light, urban sophistication, to build a grim, medieval stronghold in the wilderness? Because Bourne wasn't buying a style. He was buying a statement. Flagg was instructed to create something ancient and unbreachable, a fusion of Scottish baronial and Richardsonian Romanesque styles. These were not the aesthetics of a welcoming summer home. They were the aesthetics of power, permanence, and war. The primary material is a dark, rugged granite, blasted from a neighboring island that Bourne also owned. The stone seems to drink the light, giving the castle a somber, almost menacing presence against the bright river. This was a deliberate choice. It visually roots the structure to its island, making it appear as if it grew from the rock itself, an ancient geological feature, not a recent creation of new money. The message was clear. This was not a temporary residence, but a permanent dynasty. This stands in stark opposition to the Gilded Age mansions of Newport. Those famous cottages were built for display. They are light, airy, often wooden structures with vast windows and sprawling verandas, designed to be seen and to host a glittering social theatre. They are fundamentally insecure, built on the assumption of a peaceful, ordered world where the only battles were for social supremacy. The Towers rejects this world entirely. Its windows are smaller, its walls are thick, and its profile is one of defense, not invitation. It is the architectural antithesis of Newport. It is a statement of anti-social power, a retreat from a world deemed hostile and untrustworthy. Every element reinforces this message. The soaring, 4-story clock tower is not just for telling time. It is a watchtower, offering an unparalleled 360-degree view of the surrounding seaway. The turrets and crenellations are not romantic fantasies. They are the symbolic language of a medieval keep. They speak of archers, of sieges, of a lord secure within his domain, looking down upon any who might approach his shores. It is an architecture of vertical dominance and impenetrable defense. This exterior was not designed for admiration, but for deterrence. It was the first line of defense, a carefully crafted projection of feudal power in an age of supposed democracy. It told the world that the man inside was not a mere businessman, but a sovereign in his own right, protected by walls of stone and a moat of cold, deep water. But this menacing exterior was merely the shell. The true genius of its design, the real mechanism of social control, was hidden within its floor plan. If the threatening exterior was a declaration of power, the interior was the engine that made it function. A floor plan is more than a layout of rooms. It is a diagram of a society, a blueprint for a way of life. And the floor plan of the Towers reveals a world of almost pathological order, a machine designed for the perfect, frictionless performance of Gilded Age hierarchy. It was not a home, it was a social mechanism, ruthlessly efficient and built upon one central principle: absolute control. The most profound expression of this control was the complete erasure of labor. A staff of nearly 40 people was required to run this machine, yet they were designed to be invisible. A complete, parallel network of secret corridors and hidden staircases exists behind the main walls, a ghost network that allowed servants to move throughout the castle's 28 rooms without ever entering the family's line of sight. They were the unseen human engine, stoking the fires, preparing the meals, and cleaning the rooms, their existence acknowledged only by the results of their work. This was not a design choice for convenience, it was social engineering, ensuring the masters could live in a world seemingly free of the toil that supported it. This medieval social structure was powered by a startlingly modern heart. The castle was a technological marvel, a paradox of stone and wire. Its private power plant gave it electric light, a telephone system connected its rooms, and a central heating system battled the harsh northern winters. It was a fortress with a nervous system. The most telling piece of technology sits in the clock tower, a massive water-powered clock mechanism, an intricate wonder of gears and hydraulics that not only told the time, but chimed the quarter hours with bronze bells. This wasn't just a clock, it was a statement. In his isolated kingdom, Bourne had achieved mastery over darkness, distance, and even time itself. The floor plan also served as a rigid map of social roles, particularly gender. The spaces were clearly demarcated. The library, paneled in dark wood and filled with books, was the undisputed male domain, a place for business, intellect, and strategy. The nearby breakfast room, filled with hunting trophies, was another bastion of masculine ritual. These stood in contrast to the brighter, more open spaces for receiving guests, the traditional domain of the lady of the house. The architecture itself dictated the boundaries of behavior, creating a stage where every member of the household knew their part and their place. But the final, darkest layer of this mechanism reveals that the secret passages were not just for the servants. Hidden in the walls are portholes, grills, and sliding panels designed for one purpose: surveillance. From these concealed positions, the master of the house could discreetly observe the great hall, the dining room, and other key areas. This is the ultimate truth of the interior. It was a panopticon. The profound distrust that inspired the castle's granite armor was turned inward, aimed not just at the staff, but at guests, and perhaps even family. The owner was not merely a resident, he was the warden, the unseen eye at the center of his own machine. This total control over the internal social world, however, was still not enough. The machine had to extend beyond the stone walls to conquer the island itself. A machine for social control cannot function in a wilderness. For the fortress to be complete, the island itself, its wild, chaotic nature, had to be broken and remade in the image of its master. The obsessive control that dictated the interior's hidden passages and fireproof corridors could not stop at the stone walls. It had to extend outward to wage a war against the granite, the wind, and the water. The project of the towers was not just the construction of a castle, but the complete subjugation of an ecosystem. The first enemy was the island itself. Dark Island was a barren, 7-acre rock, a remnant of a glacier's passing with little more than scrub brush and thin, acidic soil. It was a landscape of raw, untamable nature. This would not do. A Gilded Age lord required manicured lawns, fragrant gardens, and level ground for civilized recreation. So, in an act of staggering logistical might, Bourne began to literally build a new island on top of the old one. Tons upon tons of rich topsoil were loaded onto barges and ferried to the island, a slow, methodical assault that buried the unforgiving granite under a blanket of manufactured fertility. The evidence of this conquest is still visible today. The perfect green lawns that sweep down to the river's edge are not natural. They are an artificial skin, an imposed and carefully maintained illusion of pastoral peace. Elaborate rose gardens were planted, their fragile beauty a defiant testament to the brute force required to make them grow. And in the ultimate symbol of this imposed order, a tennis court was built, a perfectly flat, geometric plane of recreation laid over a jagged, hostile foundation. This was not landscaping, it was terraforming. It was a demonstration that with enough money and will, even the earth itself could be forced to submit. The second front in this war was against the river. The St. Lawrence Seaway is not a gentle current. It is a powerful force of nature, capable of generating violent storms and, in winter, crushing ice flows. To protect his fleet of yachts, the crucial link to the outside world and his primary means of escape, Bourne constructed massive boathouses. These were not flimsy wooden sheds. They were fortifications of granite, built to the same impregnable standard as the castle itself, designed to break the waves and shrug off the ice. They were naval pens, turning a hostile river into a secure harbor under his absolute control. But the final act of defiance was against the northern climate itself. The short summers and brutal winters of the Thousand Islands impose a strict, natural calendar. Bourne rejected it. A large, heated, glass greenhouse, referred to as the squash court, was erected on the island. This was not merely a place to grow vegetables, it was a bubble of eternal summer, a biosphere where fresh flowers could be cultivated year-round, even as blizzards raged outside. It was the ultimate expression of control, the power to defy the seasons. The entire island had now become an extension of the fortress, a controlled, artificial environment where every blade of grass and every flower was a product of his will. On this perfectly engineered stage, the highly ritualized life of the Gilded Age could finally be performed. With the environment conquered and the stage set, what kind of life was performed within this fortress of solitude? At its zenith, the Towers was not a stage for the grand theatrical society balls of Newport. Its formidable appearance was a filter designed to keep the world out, not to invite it in. Life here was not a public performance for the gossip columns, but a series of highly controlled, private rituals that reinforced the family's status as a self-contained dynasty. It was less a palace and more a royal court in exile. The central ritual of this court was the commute of its king. Frederick Bourne, despite being on a remote island, remained the active president of a global corporation. His journeys to the Singer headquarters in New York City were a spectacle of private, seamless power. He would board his personal steam yacht, the Sayonara, which would ferry him down the river to the mainland. There, a private rail car would be waiting to attach to a southbound train, delivering him directly to the heart of his financial empire. This was not a commute. It was a royal procession, a journey conducted entirely within a bubble of private luxury, insulated from the common world of public transport. The castle's primary function, beyond a family sanctuary, was as a base of operations for a very specific type of Gilded Age leisure: the hunt. The surrounding islands and the nearby Canadian mainland were rich with waterfowl and deer, and the Towers served as a luxurious, fortified hunting lodge. This was not sport for survival. It was a ritual of aristocratic dominance over the natural world. Expeditions would set out from the secure harbor, returning with their prizes to a household perfectly equipped to process and serve them. The hunt was a perfect metaphor for Bourne's life, a controlled, strategic excursion from a secure base to extract resources from the wilderness, followed by a triumphant return to comfort and security. Daily life was a structured affair, a strict calendar of civilized routines imposed on the wild setting. Mornings were for family activities, boating on the river, a game of tennis on the perfectly manicured court. Afternoons were for quiet pursuits, followed by formal dinners in the evening, served by the invisible staff that moved through the hidden corridors. This was not the chaotic, free-flowing social scene of the Astor's Beechwood mansion. The guest list at the Towers was small, exclusive, and carefully curated. It was limited to immediate family and trusted business associates. Every interaction was controlled, every guest vetted. It was a world designed to eliminate chance encounters and unwelcome surprises. But this entire, perfect, hermetically sealed world was built on a foundation of brutal industrial reality, a reality that lay far from the clean waters of the St. Lawrence. That brutal industrial reality, a world far from the clean waters and manicured lawns of the St. Lawrence, had a name: the Singer Manufacturing Company. We remember the name for the humble sewing machine, a symbol of domesticity and gentle craft. But this image is a carefully constructed fiction. By the turn of the 20th century, Singer was not a quaint manufacturer. It was one of the world's first and most powerful multinational corporations, a relentless global engine of production and profit that Isaac Singer himself could have scarcely imagined. The source of the wealth that could terraform an island was not just a clever invention, but a revolutionary and ruthless system. At its heart were the colossal factories, chief among them the plant in Elizabeth, New Jersey. Here, the company perfected the art of mass production on a scale that dwarfed its competitors. Pioneering the use of interchangeable parts, Singer's assembly lines were a symphony of brutal efficiency, churning out machines with relentless speed. This industrial might was paired with a new form of commercial warfare. Singer's agents created the installment plan, allowing them to push their products into the homes of those who couldn't afford them, creating a new class of consumer debt. An army of aggressive door-to-door salesmen operating on a global scale completed the conquest of the market. This system was perfected not by the flamboyant inventor Isaac Singer, but by the cold strategists who followed him, men like Edward Cabot Clark and eventually Frederick Bourne. They understood that the machine was not the product, the company was the product. They waged vicious wars in the courts over patents, crushing smaller rivals. They built a corporate structure that was as impregnable as the granite walls of the towers. And at the base of this entire pyramid was the human cost. The fortune was generated by the relentless, monotonous labor of thousands of factory workers. For 10, 12 hours a day, they stood in the deafening roar of the factory, performing the same task over and over, their lives measured in pieces assembled and wages earned. This is the dirty, deafening secret behind the silent castle. Every granite block was paid for by the toil of an unnamed worker in Elizabeth. Every manicured rose was fertilized by the profits extracted from their long hours. The profound paranoia that drove Bourne to build a fortress was not an abstract fear of the world. It was a specific, intimate fear of the consequences of his own system. He knew the conditions in his factories. He knew the simmering resentment that was the natural byproduct of his fortune. The towers was not built to keep out a hypothetical enemy. It was built to keep out the very people whose labor gave him everything. But the story of this industrial truth, this direct line between the factory floor and the fortress island, would be almost completely erased, overshadowed by a much grander, more tragic tale taking place just down the river. The direct line between the factory floor and the fortress island, a story of labor and fear, should have been Bourne's defining legacy. But history is not always a record of the truth. It is often just a record of the loudest story. And just a few miles down the St. Lawrence River, a story was unfolding that was so loud, so romantic, and so tragic that it would cast a permanent shadow over the towers, effectively eclipsing its darker, more complex narrative for a century. The conflict that obscured Bourne's fortress was not one of armed men, but of competing myths, and he was destined to lose. The source of this eclipse was another castle, a project of almost unimaginable scale and ambition, Boldt Castle. Its creator was George C. Boldt, the millionaire proprietor of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, a man who lived his life in the public eye. His castle, rising on Hart Island, was conceived as the ultimate public declaration of love for his wife Louise. It was not a fortress, but a fantasy, a full-sized Rhineland castle with 120 rooms, Italian gardens, and a monumental arch that was to serve as a formal water gate. For years, the river echoed with the sounds of its construction, a spectacle of hundreds of workmen building a monument to a Gilded Age romance. Then, in January 1904, the unthinkable happened. Louise Boldt died suddenly. A telegram arrived on Hart Island with a single, devastating command from the heartbroken George Boldt: "Stop all construction." And they did. Tools were dropped, materials were left where they lay, and the army of workmen departed, leaving the magnificent castle unfinished, a monument not to love, but to loss. For the next 73 years, Boldt Castle stood as a beautiful, heartbreaking ruin, open to the elements and to vandals, its tragic story becoming one of America's great romantic legends. It was a story that was simply too good to compete with. It had a famous public figure, a grand romantic gesture, and a tragic operatic ending. It was a fairy tale, even in its incompletion. This overwhelming narrative provided the perfect cover for the towers. While the public imagination was captured by the tragic ruin of Boldt Castle, Bourne's private fortress could recede into the background. This was a fate that Bourne himself would have undoubtedly preferred. His family actively sought privacy, not publicity. They did not host the kind of press-attracting galas that the Astors or Vanderbilts used to cement their social status. The guest lists were small, the affairs private. The castle's remote location and the family's deliberate insularity kept it out of the society pages and, therefore, out of the popular consciousness. While Boldt Castle became a famous public landmark, a symbol of tragic love, Singer Castle remained in the shadows, its true name, the towers, and its true purpose, as a fortress born of paranoia, slowly forgotten. The great tragic love story of George and Louise Boldt provided a convenient distraction from the much more unsettling story of Frederick Bourne and his workers. The public preferred the romantic ruin to the paranoid fortress, and so the narrative of Singer Castle was slowly rewritten, its sharp edges sanded down. It became, in the shadow of its famous neighbor, just another quirky, Gilded Age summer home, with a few fun secret passages. The original driving motivation of fear was lost, eclipsed by a more palatable story. But while narratives can be forgotten, the unforgiving arithmetic of reality cannot. The same forces that built the castle would eventually conspire to bring its golden age to an end. The forces that built the fortress could not preserve it forever. A private kingdom, no matter how well engineered, is still subject to the laws of the outside world, specifically the unyielding laws of economics and time. The golden age of the towers, a period of absolute control and limitless resources, ended not with a bang, but with a slow, grinding calculation of decline. The paranoia that had accounted for every threat from the outside world had failed to account for a simple truth. The machine he had built was simply too expensive to run without him. The decline began with the death of the king. When Frederick Bourne died in 1919, the castle passed to his children. But they had inherited a monument, not a home. They had inherited a financial black hole. The sheer cost of upkeep was staggering. Heating a 28-room granite structure through a northern winter, maintaining a staff of 40, powering a private electrical plant, and servicing a fleet of yachts, it was an economic engine that required the vast, active fortune of a corporate president to fuel it. An inherited fortune, split among several heirs, was simply not enough. The fortress, designed for one absolute ruler, was ill-suited to a committee of descendants. Then came the great equalizer. The economic crash of 1929 and the ensuing Great Depression struck the world of inherited wealth like a thunderbolt. The value of the family's stocks and holdings plummeted. Suddenly, the extravagant seasonal lifestyle of the towers was not just an indulgence, it was an impossibility. The world that had allowed one man to terraform an island and build a private fortress had vanished, replaced by a new reality of scarcity and survival. The castle, once a symbol of impregnable security, became a symbol of unsustainable excess. The final blow was delivered by World War II. The global conflict created massive labor shortages as young men went to war and women went to work in factories. The large, cheap pool of service staff that had been the invisible engine of the Gilded Age evaporated. Sourcing materials like coal for the power plant and parts for the intricate machinery became difficult and expensive. The war effort demanded national sacrifice, and the era of the private feudal lord was over. The very industrial forces that had created Bourne's fortune now demanded a new kind of social contract, one that had no room for a secluded kingdom in the Thousand Islands. The end was a slow, piecemeal surrender. The family began selling off land, and eventually the castle's custom-made Stickley furnishings were auctioned away, the soul of the machine sold for parts. Finally, in the 1960s, the castle itself was sold for a nominal fee to the Harold Martin Evangelistic Association. They gave it a new name, Jorstadt Castle, further burying its original identity. The fortress, built to ensure a dynasty's permanence, had lasted barely 2 generations before it was given away. The machine had finally ground to a halt. But even in its decay, a strange process of rescue and loss had already begun, a fight to save the fragments of a forgotten history. A machine that has ground to a halt either rusts into oblivion or becomes a museum piece. For the towers, its afterlife would be a strange and delicate dance between these two fates. The fortress, once a symbol of impenetrable privacy, would slowly, ironically, be forced to open itself to the world in order to survive. This new chapter is a story of profound loss, but also of a remarkable, painstaking rescue, a battle to reassemble a history that had been sold off piece by painful piece. The period of loss began in the mid-20th century. Under various owners, including the Evangelistic Association, the castle fell into a state of benign neglect. Bourne's robust, fireproof construction ensured the structure itself remained sound. The granite walls and steel beams held firm. But the soul of the machine, its intricate interior and manicured grounds, began to decay. The imported topsoil eroded, the elaborate gardens grew wild, and the complex machinery in the powerhouse fell silent. The greatest loss was the dismemberment of its interior. The original, custom-designed Gustav Stickley furnishings, prime examples of the arts and crafts movement, were deemed old-fashioned and sold off at auction. The castle was becoming a hollow shell, its story and purpose scattered to the winds. The rescue began in earnest in 2001 when the property was purchased by Dark Island Tours, Inc. The new owners understood that they had not just bought a building, but a piece of history. They began the monumental task of restoration, not just repairing the physical structure, but actively hunting down the castle's scattered soul. They embarked on a treasure hunt through auction houses and private collections, seeking to reclaim the original furnishings. This effort has been astonishingly successful. Today, it is estimated that between 80 and 85% of the original furniture has been recovered and returned to its rightful place within the castle's rooms, allowing it to breathe again with a semblance of its original life. This physical rescue is supported by a more fragile archival one. The memories of the castle's zenith are not lost. They are preserved in scattered fragments. The official records, guest books, operational logs for the powerhouse, and household accounts provide a direct, factual link to its daily routines. Family photographs and letters, held by both Bourne's descendants and local institutions like the Thousand Islands Museum, offer a more intimate glimpse into the lives lived within the fortress walls. The blueprints, preserved by Ernest Flagg's firm, tell the story of its secret architecture. The castle's afterlife is a constant process of weaving these threads back together, of piecing together the evidence to reconstruct a story that was almost completely erased. Today, the fortress that was built to keep the world out now invites it in. It operates as a tourist destination, and for a price, you can even rent it for an overnight stay. The secret passages, once tools of surveillance and paranoia, are now the main attraction, a source of amusement for visitors. The story told is still the sanitized one of a whimsical sewing machine magnate and his romantic summer home. But for those who know where to look, the evidence of its true, darker purpose is everywhere, and understanding that purpose offers a critical lesson, a lesson about the profound fragility of both wealth and history itself. That lesson of profound fragility is the final secret locked within the walls of the towers. It tells us that history is a contested space where the most convenient narrative often buries the most important truth. And the truth of this castle, stripped of its romantic fables, offers a lesson that is more vital and unsettling today than it was a century ago. The core lesson is this: fortresses of wealth are not built on foundations of confidence. They are built on foundations of fear. The Towers is a physical manifestation of the deep, gnawing anxiety that ran parallel to the immense optimism of the Gilded Age. It is a monument to the paranoia of the powerful, a tacit admission that the men who were transforming the world were terrified of the world they were creating. Think of the contrast. In Newport, the Vanderbilts built their airy marble palaces for display, for a social theater designed to prove their supremacy. Their architecture, for all its opulence, was fundamentally insecure, built on the assumption of a stable social order. Bourne built for the opposite reason. His fortress assumed that the social order was a fiction, that the revolution was always just one spark away. His private kingdom proves that the titans of industry knew, on some level, that the system they had perfected was a powder keg. While they preached a gospel of progress and opportunity to the public, they privately invested in fireproof vaults, defensible islands, and secret passages. The Towers was not an escape to paradise, it was a retreat to a fortified position. The granite was meant to last for centuries, but the social order it was designed to outlast crumbled in less than a generation, proving that no wall is high enough to keep out the forces of history. So why does this forgotten fortress on a remote island matter to us now? Because the Gilded Age never truly ended. We live in its echo, an era of unprecedented wealth concentration existing alongside deep social and economic anxiety. The story of the Towers is a warning that the architecture of paranoia is not a historical artifact. It is a recurring symptom of extreme inequality. Look at the world today. The private islands purchased by tech billionaires, the luxury doomsday bunkers built for the super-rich in New Zealand, the armies of private security that insulate the wealthy from the public. These are the modern children of the Towers. They are born from the same fundamental fear, that the world that generates their immense fortune is inherently unstable, and that a day of reckoning may come. Bourne's fortress is simply the original blueprint. For those of you who want to uncover these hidden histories, the story of this castle offers a practical roadmap. The first step is to always reject the official story, the postcard narrative. Look for the contradictions. Why does a summer home have a dungeon? Why does a romantic castle have spy holes? The motivation is never just whimsy or aesthetics. It is a response to pressure, to fear, to a threat that has been deliberately forgotten. To find that threat, you must investigate two separate, seemingly unrelated archives. The first is the Archive of Leisure, the local historical societies, the family photo albums, the society pages. This will give you the official story. But the real key lies in the second archive, the Archive of Labor. You must find the business records, the reports of strikes at the factories, the payrolls, the testimony of workers. You must research the social and political turmoil of the era. The truth is found where these two stories collide, where the plans for the Rose Garden intersect with the records of a violent factory strike. The real history of the Gilded Age is written in that collision. Ultimately, however, the primary document is the building itself. You must learn to read the architecture. A building like the Towers is a confession written in granite and steel. The hidden passages for servants are a statement about the invisibility of labor. The fireproof construction is a testament to the fear of arson. The surveillance peepholes are an admission of profound distrust for everyone. These are not features, they are clauses in that confession. History is not just what is remembered, it is what is built, and what is built can never be truly silenced. These investigations are not easy. They require sifting through forgotten archives and challenging the comfortable myths we are told about our past. It is a slow and difficult process, but it is essential work. If you believe this work is important, support our channel. Like this video, subscribe to our series, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation. The algorithms that govern this platform value your engagement, and your support allows us to dedicate the time needed to uncover these stories. But most importantly, I need your help. I need your eyes and ears. What is the building, the family, the forgotten factory, or the abandoned project in your part of the world that holds a secret? What is the place that everyone knows, but no one really knows the story of? Tell me in the comments below, because history is not owned by the powerful, it is reclaimed by the curious.